All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy Podcast where it's going down. We're yelling, Timber Wolves, you better move, you better Luca dance. Shout out Kesha. The 2025 NBA playoffs are here, and the Lakers' chase for 18 officially begins in earnest this weekend. LFG. I'm your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I'm joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander. Tommy, are you ready for the playoffs? How are you feeling about this year's run in comparison to previous years? It's a weird one.
I'm very excited for the playoffs. I'm very excited that we get to watch, the games, the play-in games casually and not stress out that we're somehow going to lose and then have to, play in for the eighth seed. And then I don't know. We all remember from the past few years how painful that was. So I'm definitely excited. I think the seeding for us is nearly as good as it could have gone um, overall. And I mean, like, not just in the first round but like when you factor in what it looks like kind of throughout the whole potential playoffs. So yeah, overall, I think really good.
Also, did you realize that we have Luka Doncic in a Lakers jersey about to play in the playoffs? The guy who went to the finals last year?
Oh, I really hope they remembered to put him on the active roster.
Me too. So again, every step along the way, ever since the Luka trade happened, it's been this constant progression for me of like pinching myself and trying to like understand the reality of where we're at. And yeah, I think it's going to come in full force in the playoffs for sure. And it's not going to hit us till it actually happens, till we're making our way through this run. We're the number 3 seed, to your point, no play in. We've got Luka Doncic, we've got LeBron James, we've got Austin Reeves peaking at the right time. And as excited as I am, which I'm very excited, I'm also still a bit apprehensive, mainly because we haven't had too much of a runway with this team, even though it's been like, I don't know, 2.5, 3 months. And for me, the verdict is still out a little. Like in my head, I know the type of ceiling that this group can reach. I just kind of want to see it in a playoff setting this particular with this particular group first to believe it. But I am pretty excited. I could see us, I don't know, it's so weird. I could see us losing in the second round, but I could also see us winning the championship. That's how sort of wide open I feel things are. Um, but before we dive into the Lakers facing the Minnesota Timberwolves, by the way, I forgot to mention that we're facing the Timberwolves. Before we dive into the nitty gritty details of that matchup, I wanted to start general and macro first and talk about whether you wanted the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first place. And wanted is a strong word because
Yeah.
every team in the West is super tough and every team presents its own struggles that the Lakers will have to match up against. But on Sunday, before that bonanza of every NBA team playing at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, things essentially boiled down to, for the most part, the Lakers either facing the Golden State Warriors or the Minnesota Timberwolves. So, without getting into too much specifics on the Minnesota Timberwolves side of things, was there a particular matchup you were angling for? And again, both teams pose their own problems. Everyone is tough in the West, but yeah, were you kind of again hoping, wanting are all strong words, but which team out of the two were you angling for? And then if you're going to talk about the Timberwolves in conjunction with the Warriors, talk broad generalizations.
Yeah. So I guess thinking about the two games leading into the, the final two games of the season, it was really five teams, all the teams that were tied 4 through 8. They all could have ended up pretty much within that range. And when thinking about that set of teams, Memphis stood out as like one team that was struggling and maybe a relatively easy matchup. They don't play great defense. They have a lot of kind of what I don't know if one dimensional is the right word, but sort of, guys who want to score, guys who are sort of unproven. They fired their coach. I mean, they checked a lot of boxes as a team you might want to match up with in the first round. Outside of Memphis, though, when it became sort of obvious after, with one game left, it was not going to be Memphis. I think the Wolves were probably the next one. I kind of didn't want to deal with the Warriors because with the Warriors, you just, regardless of how well they're playing, and they've been playing extremely, extremely well post trade deadline, um, you just don't want to deal with Steph. I think the fact that all of these other pieces have sort of come together post trade deadline. Kerr is still there. Draymond has had a really good season. He's getting a little bit of defensive player of the year hype now, but just generally his numbers across the board have been pretty good. Jimmy has the fit somehow. Again, to me, defying all logic, the fit has worked. Pods has improved significantly since the first three times we played the Warriors this season. And frankly, we've owned the Warriors the last few years, but I think a big part, the Warriors are one of the very few matchups I think in the entire NBA where I feel like we got worse post Luka trade, and not necessarily worse like they beat us, but just Anthony Davis destroyed that team,
Hmm.
and everything they wanted to do was completely neutralized by an AD LeBron front court because the AD could match up with Draymond or frankly any number. Like he could switch on the perimeter. AD can do so many things against that team, but they have no answers for him on the other end. So 80 was putting up 30, 15, and five, on 50% shooting. I mean, he completely took over those
Yeah.
series and those games for us, and including the three that we beat them earlier this year, although I know he got injured during one of those. So anyway, I think the Warriors, because of the diversity of ball handlers that they
Yep.
have and shot creators and the fact that they're such an elite defense post All-Star break. I think for a team like us who's still trying to find their way and hasn't, obviously we have Luca, and I take Luca over Jimmy Butler, as I think most would. We're we have not found our way as much as they have. I think post All-Star break, and we need a little more time. And because of that, facing them in the first round scared me a little. I
Mhm.
think if we face them later, I feel a little bit better about it. But yeah, first round, I would be nervous to go up against Steph and the way those guys have been playing defense.
Yeah, and I mean, just from like an intangible experience veteran standpoint, you're talking about Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Jimmy Butler. These are all NBA Finals veterans. You compare that to Ant Edwards, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert, and I'm like, I don't know. At some point, even though the athleticism and physicality of the game obviously favors the Wolves, I'm going with high basketball IQ on Steph, Dre, and Jimmy Butler's end, as well as some veteran savviness as well. And post All Star break, look, both the Warriors and the Wolves were really good post All Star break. The Minnesota Timberwolves had the fifth best net rating. For reference, the Lakers had the 15th best net rating. It improved over the last 10 games when things kind of solidified and we had LeBron James, Rui Hachimura, Luka, and AR all healthy. But yeah, the Wolves were fifth in overall net rating, but the Warriors were even better. They were third. And I know there's like a strength of schedule argument going on here where the Warriors had like an easier schedule, et cetera, et cetera. But look, again, at the end of the day, they are the more proven team with their top stars aligned. And you mentioned Jimmy Butler's fit, but Jason Timpf, he was on the LFR podcast recently, and he comped Jimmy Butler to Andre Iguodala, like a souped up version of Andre Iguodala with shot making. And when he said that, it kind of clicked in my head. I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Jimmy Butler can sort of knit everything together because he plays on both ends, but in a pinch, you can throw the ball down to him and he can create a shot out of nothing. And he's also a good playmaker. So for me, the fit kind of makes more sense under that lens. And then from a schematic standpoint, I think you'd agree with me. The Lakers, since the Luka trade, have proven that they can be a pretty good physical north and south defending team in the sense that if another team has players who just like to ram it into the paint, the Lakers can kind of build a wall against that type of team?
Yeah,
But the
100%.
Warriors are an East and West everywhere sort of team because they have the foot speed and the ball handlers to kind of keep your head on a swivel. And if you are not 100% locked in at all times, you could get beat very easily by a back cut, by a shooter coming off of a curl, and it's over from there. You know, it kind of reminds me of like the Nuggets at their peak, but with faster foot speed because Steph Curry is a jitterbug out there. And when you have Draymond Green and Jimmy Butler setting illegal screens, or even if they're not illegal, just really solid screens, yeah, you could be done, you know, if you're not paying attention. So that's what worried me the most about the Warriors. Their foot speed, their system, the high basketball IQ players they have, and if you compare them to the Minnesota Timberwolves, they just have the overall better shooters on their team, you know, in bunches. So, in summary, again, these are both tough matchups, but if forced to pick, I was angling for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and we'll get to why in a second. Um, Now, before we take it to break and start talking about the Timberwolves, to your point, just extending things out and looking at the Lakers' current bracket, again, I'm not like licking my chops over here looking at this bracket, but looking at how it could have shaped out if we had been in the other bracket, I don't know, man. Like, as of the time of this recording, we don't know who's going to come out of the Memphis Golden State playing game today. Let's say it's the Golden State Warriors. Regardless, if we are able to fortunately beat the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round, and I'm not trying to get ahead, but let's just say hypothetically we get out of the first round, then we would go on to face either the Houston Rockets or the Golden State Warriors. And we would completely avoid OKC, Clippers, and Denver till the Western Conference Finals. And for me, that is, I'm not going to say like a huge sigh of relief, but we got the better end of the stick for sure, because whether it's Houston or Golden State, I just mentioned why I'm scared of Golden State, but to your point, I think down the road in the second round, I think we'll be better equipped to handle them, and maybe they'll be a little bit more tired. And if it's Houston that we have to face, I mean, Houston is this year's Memphis Grizzlies of 2023. They just don't have the experience, in my opinion, and I think you'll be able to exploit them in many different ways because of that lack of experience. Even though they do have some veterans like Steven Adams and Fred VanVleet and Jayshawn Tate off the bench, like you guys know what I'm saying in terms of experience. Um, but yeah, any last words to say really quickly about just like the overall bracket we're in, because I do think it's pretty favorable.
I agree it's favorable. I think if Golden State loses tonight somehow to Memphis, it's going to be a little bit more favorable because then it's, I think our three worst, even though Denver's beaten us the last few years, I do think our three worst matchups are OKC, the Clippers, and Golden State. And if we only have to play one of those teams, because they're all in their own separate bracket, and we would only face one of those, whoever survives, to the Western Conference Finals. Um, that in my mind would be ideal. But yeah, given how this could have gone, I think we probably ended up in the best spot possible. I agree with you that Houston in the second round, potentially, if we're able to beat Minnesota. By the way, we're going to talk about Minnesota, as you mentioned. None of this is to downplay how good Minnesota has
Yeah,
been,
not at
too. I
all.
mean, with all these teams being as red hot as they were, Minnesota hung around right there with them and pushed themselves up out of the play-in over Golden State, nearly matched the Clippers win-loss record. And Minnesota had significant stretches where guys were hurt, and they closed the season with the fourth best net rating since like the All-Star game. So they're playing extremely well too. But
Yeah.
Houston, I agree with you. They do seem like this year's Memphis from a couple years ago. They are very, very good defensively. Amen Thompson is a rising star. I they've got Dylan Brooks. They've got a lot of physicality they can throw. I just think in a 7-game series, Sengun is not Jokic in terms of impact. And although he's extremely good, I just think you could figure out ways to sort of neutralize him a little bit on both ends in the 7-game series. And Jalen Green is a very, very good offensive player, but my personal opinion is that Houston lacks that like go to I guess when was the last time a team made it to the conference finals with their best scorer being like a Jalen Green caliber player, right? It's usually like a perennial all-star type of guy
Yeah.
who's like your best player. So I I think in seven, I would like our chances against Houston as well.
Yeah, I agree. And to stave off the Clippers, who have like the number one net rating since the post All Star break, and to stave off even the Denver Nuggets, who I know are going through their own sort of turmoil after firing Mike Malone, OKC, Clippers, Denver, to stave them off till the very end, I think is preferable. And with the Clippers, who knows? Kawhi Leonard, not saying I'm wishing this upon anybody, but Kawhi Leonard may already be banged up by that point. All right, let's get to the meat of our episode, the Minnesota Timberwolves. Before we get to that, though, let's first talk about our sponsors for the day, Underdog Fantasy. Because with the basketball playoffs underway, there is no better place to put your daily fantasy skills to the test than with the Underdog Fantasy app. Start a playoff series by using your Game 1 boost and continue boosting each subsequent game to unlock the next one. The longer the series, the bigger the boosts. Millions of fans have already won billions making picks on Underdog. Will you be next? To play, all you have to do is download the app and choose whether a player will go higher or lower on one of their stats. You can choose from things like points, assists, and so much more. If you get your picks correct, you could win up to 1,000 times your money. So you could turn $1 into $1,000 just with your hoops knowledge. So, from personal experience, now that the regular season is over and we've entered into single round eliminations in the playoffs, for me, this is the best time to enter some contests and make your picks because you have a more concentrated look at every series, every matchup, and you can better gauge how a player or team will do on a night to night basis because each game literally matters. Especially once you get to those elimination games, you can really place your bets on your favorite superstars with much better conviction, in my opinion, because is Luka really going to let the Lakers drop to 0-3 or get eliminated 4-3 in Los Angeles? I think not. So why not test your hoops knowledge with that in mind as well? Download the Underdog app and sign up with promo code LEGACY to unlock a special offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. That's promo code LEGACY and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Arizona and Massachusetts, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. See assets.underdogfantasy.com/web/extend.html for details. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. All right, with that said, let's pitch it to our sponsors, and when we return, let's talk about the Lakers' first round series matchup against the Minnesota Timberwolves. All right, so we are back. The Minnesota Timberwolves, they have changed since last season somewhat drastically. They swapped Karl Anthony Towns for Julius Randle. Maybe that's not too drastic. But this year, and obviously the Lakers have changed, pretty drastically as well, swapping AD for Luka Doncic, D'Lo for DFS, et cetera, et cetera. So this year, the Lakers matchup versus the Minnesota Timberwolves, they split the season series 2-2. One of those Lakers losses was without LeBron James. 3 of those games were without Luka Doncic. One win was with Luka on February 27th at home when Luka only shot 6 of 20 from the field and had 21, 13, and 5. If I recall correctly, that was only like his second or third game with the Lakers, so we'll cut him some slack on the field goal percentage. And then last season, though, in the Western Conference Finals, Luka Doncic did beat this Timberwolves team in 5 games. Now, he had Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively with him. He won't have Anthony Davis with him on the Lakers, but Luka averaged 32 points, 9.6 rebounds, 8.4 assists on 47% from the field and 43% from 3, hitting almost 4 threes a game, which is ridiculous. And this year, aside from Kyrie Irving, he is going to have LeBron James and Austin Reeves with him as 2 other lethal primary creators. So, in my opinion, I feel like the floor should be even better spaced for him. So, with all of that laid out, let's start with some of the pros to this matchup first, and then we'll round things out with our concerns. Um, yeah, in your opinion, what do you like about this matchup between the Lakers and the Timberwolves? Because for me, when I was watching some tape on Luca against Minnesota last year in the playoffs, he has proven that he's not bothered by Minnesota's length and physicality with regards to the wings that they can throw at him, from Anthony Edwards to Jaden McDaniels to Naz Reid to Nikhil Alexander Walker. Like, Luca thrives on body contact and knowing how to absorb that body contact and leveraging your weight against his weight, et cetera, et cetera. And then when it comes to Rudy Gobert, I feel like the Lakers can play this dude off of the floor. They've done it with supersized teams in the recent past against the Oklahoma City Thunder with Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein, and then with the Dallas Mavericks with Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, Anthony Davis, and Luca showed it in flashes against Minnesota last season. And the only reason why Gobert still played 30 plus minutes in that series was because Dallas was also playing two starting caliber centers in Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. With the Lakers, Rui is going to play small ball center more often than not, and especially in crunch time. So I feel like because of all those reasons, they are definitely going to force Rudy Gobert off the floor. And Minnesota likes to play drop with Rudy Gobert, and playing drop against Luca is pretty much death. He can chop teams up in the mid range, and let's say Gobert doesn't play drop and he switches out to Luca. Well, then the floor has opened up this year for Luca with the Lakers, and he can now swing it to LeBron or AR to cut the rest of the Wolves teams apart. And if he wants to just take Gobert himself, he can do the step back three on him like he did in the clutch in like game 2 last season. And so for me, again, we'll get to the concerns later, but for me, I'm pretty confident about the ways the Lakers can exploit their own version of quote unquote small big ball against the Minnesota Timberwolves, who like to employ the former defensive player of the year in Rudy Gobert as their starting center. And overall, I'm much more confident in the Lakers having more visionary playmaking talent in LeBron James, Luka Doncic, and Austin Reeves. I feel like Minnesota's playmaking is more erratic and they can be baited into hero ball. And then if I just look at the erraticness and volatility of their two main stars, Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle, I feel like you'll be able to harass those two into bouts of CTE in the clutch. And you can find ways to get under their skin, which I think Jared Vanderbilt will do a great job doing against Anthony Edwards. But from your standpoint and your viewpoint, you can pick apart anything I said. What kind of encourages you about this matchup, first of all?
Yeah, I think the encouraging signs, a lot of it is what you sort of summarize. And I think it comes down to schemability, I guess you could call it. This is something that we didn't have in prior years. It was just like whoever was the best talent was going to win that game, because we weren't like strategizing against specific opponents. It's just, it's JJ's first playoff series. So I don't want to like overstate how impactful I think he'll be, but I do think that he is going to be a difference maker in this series as a coach, from a schematic standpoint. And, you mentioned Gobert. I think he's really easy to figure out how to sort of minimize his effectiveness as a defensive player, because keep in mind, post Luka trade, we're shooting 50% of our shot attempts from three.
Mm-hmm.
That takes Gobert out of the equation right there on 50% of your possessions, basically. So, there's that factor. He's a significant part of their like rotation. If they're not playing him 30 minutes a game, who are they playing? Right? Naz Reid, and then that creates other issues for them. Um, Julius Randle is a career 34% shooter from the field in playoffs.
Ugh.
It's a 15 game sample size, which is not huge, but also not insignificant. I'll point out, 34% from the field. I think it's like 28 or something percent from three in his 15 games. He is, I think, just if you follow Julius Randle, which you probably have if you were following the Lakers when he was on the team, this has always sort of been his issue. He's kind of an easy player to scheme against because he's got like in a 7 game series, there will probably be 1 or 2 games where his outside shot is falling. But even in those games, he like sort of neutralizes himself with poor decision making and over driving and,
Hmm.
passing into crowds and falling asleep on defense. And so there are just, again, when that's your second best player, I just feel like there are ways to sort of take advantage of that. Anthony Edwards, I think, does pose some problems.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned the things that we could take advantage of there, and I guess we're focusing on advantages here. So, you know, I I think that that's really the key. Oh, and I guess the third one is the lack of playmaking, which I think you also
Yep.
mentioned. It's not just like Anthony Edwards, I think, as a playoff playmaker, and in the second half of the season as a playmaker, I think he looked a lot better. I think the issue is who is it if it's not him? Like, in other words, you're double teaming Anthony Edwards at half court. Who is he? Getting the ball to at that point? Mike
Yeah.
Conley, that guy's like 40 years old. Dante DiVincenzo plays off the bench. It's like the outlet. It like maybe there are outlets. Dante DiVincenzo's not a bad player. Mike Conley, even with his age, is not a bad player, but these are not elite playmakers at this stage in their career. And sort of like what we were touching on with the issues with defending the Warriors, those issues are absolutely not present with the Timberwolves. I think there is going to be like 1 or 2 games in the series where you take Ant out of it by double teaming him every time he crosses half court, and there's just not going to be anybody else who can consistently create plays for their teammates on that
Yeah.
team.
Or you just force him again. He can get into these tunnel vision bouts where he wants to take the tough pull up jump shot, and you can force him into those and even allow him to do that and take the rest of his teammates out of the equation. So now let's get into the concerns. I think there are some obvious ones right off the bat. I mean, this isn't going to be like super nuanced or anything, but we could and probably will get killed on the boards if we are not super focused and honed in on boxing dudes out, keeping that physical level of intensity. Um, I think physicality and lengthwise across the board, Minnesota probably has us beat with how versatile they are defensively between. I mean, Randall can be useful here and there, but I'm talking about not Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Nikhil Alexander Walker, even Mike Conley as a guard is a good defender, even though he's 40 years old. Naz Reid, I think, is a pretty solid, at least physical defender. So they can throw a lot of bodies at us. And then obviously Rudy Gobert, if he's played in the right situations and the right scheme. And if Rudy Gobert sits, I do think Minnesota actually has a pretty great small ball lineup that they can employ against us, which matches up pretty well with our best unit because I think they can go Naz Reid, Julius Randle, Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, and Nickel Alexander Walker to match up with our Rui Hachimura, LeBron, Luca, DFS, AR lineup, which is our best net rated lineup since the Luca trade. And so, how we handle their all defense and length and brooding force group will be telling, in my opinion. And then, lastly, I think this might be a tough series for Austin Reeves because I was watching previous games with Minnesota before the Luka trade, and Austin Reeves actually had the benefit more often than not of having Mike Conley on him, whereas Nickel Alexander Walker or even Jaden McDaniels at times was stuck on D'Angelo Russell. Now, Jaden McDaniels will probably be matched up against Luka, and while Mike Conley should still start out on AR, I think Nickel Alexander Walker will inevitably be hounding AR 90 feet of the court for much of the series, and especially in crunch time. So for me, I'm not saying he can do it. He can't do it, but can Austin remain composed and handle the physicality and pressure against Nickel Alexander Walker, sometimes Jaden McDaniels, sometimes Anthony Edwards? And will he be able to handle all that pressure without getting too sloppy and sped up? That's my biggest question. I think he can. I just wouldn't be surprised if he has his struggles in this series. But what are some of your biggest concerns with the Wolves?
Yeah, the defense and the Wolves' defense and physicality is going to get them one or two games in this series for sure. They they're just huge, right? And if there's a game where they're locked in on the perimeter, we're not hitting our shots, they're able to continue playing Gobert. I mean, they're just going to outsize us at least once, maybe twice in the series. And it's going to be a tough game. I mean, you can imagine like in a hostile environment on the road in Minnesota. They obviously had the disappointment to Luca last year. Like they, I worry about one of those games. They have enough defenders at the right positions to throw at our three primary ball handlers. I think that is potentially, problematic. I don't think it's something that we can't sort of adjust to. And I think ultimately, our guys will be able to win out. But I mean, even off the bench, right? We're focused on McDaniels and Ant when he gets locked in can really defend. And they've got their big men, but Dante DiVincenzo is a very good defensive player.
Yeah.
I forget the name of their
Like
other guard.
Jalen Clark or whatever that they've been playing.
Yeah, that guy is a pretty elite defensive bench player. So they've got guys they can sort of throw at us. And I think that could create some issues in the 7-game series. But the other one is really Anthony Edwards.
Yeah.
He is that level of like, I'm just going to put the team on my back and I'm going
Hmm.
to decide we're winning this game. He kind of, in my opinion, elevated himself to that category this season. I think that like, he does still have some flaws in his game. He's still young. He has to prove it consistently in the playoffs, but he averaged over 10 attempts on free throws this season, or excuse me, 10 attempts from 3-point range this
Yeah.
season, making 4 a game. So,
Sick.
that's just insane. And that's like a massive improvement. And that's, yeah, it just, like I was saying, like the way that Luca we've talked about has the ability to do this. There's going to be a game where Anthony Edwards scores 40 plus in this series, I would think, and it's going to be hard to beat them on that type
Hmm.
of night. So yeah, I think Minnesota, like obviously, we're not going to sleep on them. I think they're definitely going to have some issues, but create some issues for us. And I think it's mostly going to be, their defense, the individual greatness of Anthony Edwards, the overall physicality. Some of the physicality is going to be a little bit hard to project until we see it in action because we kind of need to see how our guys are going to respond to it. It seems like a few times where, there have been really intense playoff like games that were extremely physical. Our guys have risen to the occasion. So it
Yeah.
might not be an issue. And to the point you flagged earlier, like Luca is like the ultimate, in physicality counter player.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter what you're doing defensively. It doesn't matter if you throw length at him. It doesn't matter if you throw pure size at him, pure strength at him. He continues to get his numbers, and not only that, he elevates himself in the playoffs consistently every year. He's a playoff riser. And even if you look, everybody knows how he dominated OKC. He dominated Minnesota. Minnesota was the number one defensive efficiency team in the entire league last year, and that was the case all season. OKC was in the top 3 or 5 last season as a defensive team all season. He dominated both of those teams in the playoffs, and he caught a lot of flack for what happened in Boston in the finals, but if you look at his numbers, like he actually individually played very well in that series too.
Yeah.
So, it is the case that Luka should be able to overcome the physicality, but some of our other guys, especially the guys who, DFS we acquired midseason, and we'll see how that works out. But, some of our other guys, I'm interested to see how they respond.
Yeah, and I think also the thing that worries me that I didn't mention was just it goes in line with physicality, but there are going to be runs, Tommy, where they just overwhelm us with their explosive athleticism, running up and down the court. They'll have like a thunderous jam. It's kind of like those moments against Houston Rockets where like Cam Whitmore like has like 3 dunks in a row and we just give up. I could see that happening in the middle of a playoff game because Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, and Julius Randle just like wreck the rim, and we're like, oh man, we're so slow right now. So hopefully that doesn't happen too often, but I can definitely see some of those bouts happening. Very last question, and very quickly, are there any individual matchups that you're particularly keyed on? I obviously mentioned AR versus Na. I'll be keeping a close eye on that. I think I also want to see how Rui does against Naz Reid. Can Rui stay home on Naz on the perimeter? I think Rui can take advantage of Naz's slower foot speed by taking him into the paint, cutting baseline in the dunker spot, hitting some mid-range jump shots. But will Rui stay locked in on Naz, who's like a really good three-point shooter? He hits like 2 threes a game on like 37%. And uh, simultaneously, how will Rui do against Randall? Because I personally think this will be a good matchup for Rui because Rui can bring the physicality and bump Randall off of his spots, force him to put up some very nasty looking jump shots. And then on the other end, hopefully he can get Randall sleeping by, again, cutting baseline while his head is turned and getting some easy buckets in that spot. But any other matchups that you're particularly looking forward to seeing or that you're monitoring?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty interested in it's not a specific matchup, I guess, but I am pretty interested in how we end up using Jackson Hayes in this series.
Mhm.
Um, the reason I bring that up, maybe it's obvious, right? But we've been doing this pretty consistent rotation for the last couple weeks where Jackson Hayes starts every game for us at the 5. And at the 8-minute mark, 4 minutes into the game, they pull him and they put DFS. And that's like our, quote unquote death lineup, or if you want to call it that. Like our best current net rating lineup with DFS, Rui, LeBron, Luca, and Austin. Um, to make sure that those guys get enough minutes together, right? I guess if you're thinking about that initial 4-minute stretch, what is Jackson Hayes? And I this is like a rhetorical question because I think we'll have to wait and see, honestly. But what are we getting from Jackson Hayes that we wouldn't be better getting from a Jared Vanderbilt? Because
Mhm.
if you start Jared Vanderbilt at the 5, you don't have to worry about like he's not spacing the floor because you're not really getting that from Hayes either. You do have someone who can match up against Ant and put a little bit of pressure on him early in games. And then you could still, 4 minutes into the game, pull Vando and put in DFS to have your floor spacing lineup. And then maybe go to Hayes later on when they bring in some of their bench bigs. I think Hayes is going to have a role in this series. He's been a really important player for us all year. And the lack of size is not going to be helped. Like the size mismatch, I guess, in the series is obviously it's not going to be helped by benching Hayes. So I don't know that the answer is, and I assume the answer is not going to be bench Hayes game 1, but
Mhm.
I'm kind of curious to see if game 1, if Minnesota just comes out and blitzes us, how fast is JJ going to kind of tweak that?
Yeah.
If we go down 0-1, is he going to make the switch right away? If it ends up 1-1, we split after the LA series, does he end up making the switch? Or, I doubt he would go into the game making the switch, starting Vando at the 5, but it was teased in that regular season game against Golden State towards the end of the year. There were sort of murmurs in the pregame and some of the reporters tweeting before the game that he was thinking about starting Vando at the 5 instead of Jackson Hayes in that game, because of the matchup. So I not a specific matchup, but I am very interested to see how Hayes's usage sort of gets managed,
Yeah.
given that you know Vando is going to be by far our best defensive option against Edwards. So
Yeah, and he should be very pumped up to face Ant. But yeah, that's a good, interesting question. I do think Hayes should find some. I think Hayes should be able to take advantage of Rudy Gobert being so keyed in on Luka Doncic that he should get really some really open lobs, and he should take advantage of that. We'll see how long he can do that. I think at the end of the day, it's going to boil down to which one of these teams can force their style over the other team. For Minnesota, it's going to be we want to keep Gobert on the floor so that we can maintain our size advantage and rebounding advantage. For the Lakers, it's okay, well, we'll keep Jackson Hayes out there and utilize his release valve ability as a vertical lob threat. the moment that loses its effectiveness, we're going to go small and force you to take Gobert off the floor as well. So the back and forth between those sorts of dynamics will be very interesting to watch. And we get to watch it this Saturday at like 5:30 p.m. So yeah, can't wait. With that said, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening. Please follow us on Twitter/X at Lakers Legacy Pod. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel, the same name, at Lakers Legacy Pod, and give us a 5-star rating on the Apple Podcast app and Spotify app. And the next time we talk, it'll be after game 1 or game 2, and hopefully we'll be up 2-0 by that point. But with that said, Tommy, I will catch you later. The playoffs are here, baby. The race to 18. Here we come. Boo, 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 boo.
Peace.
Laters.